actually being able to value the benefits, actually starting to look at it as an asset class, finding people that will invest in it. And I think, we've come a long way quite quickly when you look back to where we started. And I think the urgency around it and the interest is just inspiring.
Welcome to the Rebalancers podcast. I am absolutely delighted to have you on our show. Here we are in Plymouth. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, so I'm Kathryn Deeney. I'm Head of Environmental Planning at Plymouth City Council. So I have been in the area since I went to uni. I came down here to do my Masters and loved it. Always been by the sea, so really nice to be back by the sea when I came to do my Masters. Didn't leave. And have been working in and around the area in all sorts of environmental roles since.
Oh, wow. So tell me a little bit about what you did at university. What degree did you do?
So I did environmental science, and then I had a year out, and then I decided that I probably wasn't ready to get a proper job. And so I went back and did my Masters in marine science here in Plymouth. So I got a really nice mix of, green and blue.
Green and blue, and I noticed you're wearing a blue jacket, so there's definitely a preference for blue, and those Plymouth here. And so tell me a little bit about your journey. So you did your Masters, you weren't quite to get a full-time job. How did you end up for the City Council? What's your journey? What took you there?
I did environmental science mostly because that was the bit that interested me. Environment, didn't really know how to do that, so went and did environmental science, loved it. Took a year out, did some work for the Environment Agency at the time, so got that sense of what are kind of the statutory agencies. Did a bit of travelling, then decided, came back, went, maybe I'll go back to uni for a bit. Mostly because I found actually you needed a bit extra at that point in time, might show my age, to get into an environmental job. You had to have something extra. They were like hen's teeth in the southwest, unless someone left or retired, there weren't the jobs here. So I came into marine because I felt I was missing that from my previous degree, which was very much green. Loved it here. And then when I finished, I got the opportunity to work for English Nature. Yes.
English Nature.
That long ago,
okay.
Which was an amazing start to the career because I did everything from coastal surveys to things up on Dartmoor and Exmoor and that whole, and just a brilliant team that kind of introduced me to the environment sector. And then I moved to the Environment Agency and did more around planning, which was brilliant in terms of what I end up doing now. So got much more in-depth knowledge of planning system and how an environment could fit into that, which really kind of started shaping my we don't want environment and growth to be like at each other. This kind of weird juxtaposition of nature gets in the way of growth. And, I worked with a really enlightened team and we were like, no, we don't want that. We want to do it differently. And then the job came up at Plymouth City Council in the planning department as a nature conservation officer. That's an old style role. And that was about working with the planning system and working with our planning colleagues to look at how we integrate all of the environmental aspects into planning. So really great experience. And then we had really enlightened planners that still with the council, and they were very much around actually nature is part of the growth and we have to integrate it, and nobody's really doing that. So how do we do that? And as you'll see when we go through this conversation, we don't do anything on our own. So we had some really great partners. So Natural England and the Woodland Trust and the adjacent local authorities all got together and said, actually want to do something here. And no one was really doing it at the time. So we were like, well, actually what we need is a green infrastructure plan, because everyone had got to the stage of going, actually nature's not the bit on the side that you do all the other bits. And then you get, if there's any space left, it is infrastructure in the same way roads are. So we wrote our first green infrastructure plan. I worked for Natural England at the time, but in the City Council. So the idea you had an honest broker.
Yeah.
So, I could play across all of the councils and all of the organisations. And then that really started the journey into growing what was a very tiny environment team in the council. So I came back after 4 years into where we are now.
Wow, Kat, that's a lot of information we have to unpack. I was like,
you've
done the whole podcast in this last 30 seconds. But okay, let's start with the bit about how growth and the environment is treated separately, where you have one school of thought, which is they are at odds. It's either one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're saying is that also that your planning team sees it as working together. So could you perhaps unpack that a little bit for us, please?
Yeah. So when I joined the council, I think, they were really enlightened in terms of the fact that you don't need a city that's just houses and just employment and just roads. So they'd already got to a stage of going, actually, we need to do something a bit differently here. And, it was that long ago that there wasn't the climate emergency, there wasn't the biodiversity emergency, but it was very much about really great places to live.
Yeah.
And actually, people don't just live in a house, do they? They live in a space. And so when I came in and we started kind of looking at that, the Green Infrastructure Plan was the kind of first way of articulating, well, what does that mean then? How do we do that amongst all the housing and employment? So we spent some time looking at what would the key deliverables be? How would that work in a city? Where do you start? How do you make that happen? And so the Green Infrastructure Plan was a very kind of early stage. Everyone's got them now, but there weren't very many when we started, to look at where we could make interventions in the city that were multifunctional. So we stopped thinking of like, this place is for butterflies, this is a park, and that's a playing pitch, and actually starting to go, actually, these spaces need to work really hard, because in a city, you've got a lot going on, and therefore the big spaces need to work really hard and deliver lots of things, and then we need to connect them up so nature can move around, water can move around. So it was really just getting all those heads together, and that, that's where the magic happens, isn't it? All the brains, one problem, how do we solve it? And it took us a while, and, we didn't get everything perfect.
And sorry to interrupt there, but what were the problems you were trying to resolve? Because when you use the word green infrastructure, and infrastructure, you can think of it as a road, a bridge, a power station. It serves a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is twofold: is what problem was it here to answer, and what purpose was the green here to serve? If a road is to get you from A to B and power station to provide you electricity, what function did the green have?
Yeah, and it was one of the things we wanted to show, and we did it in a really basic way, like little logos, like little emojis. I didn't have emojis at the time, but little emojis of like, is it for nature? So does it help nature? Is it for water management? Is it for carbon? Is it for well-being? So even then, we were starting to think, actually, these are services that nature's delivering, and therefore it becomes an infrastructure asset.
Yeah.
And actually, obviously biased, but actually I think parks deliver a lot more than a road. If you look at service, it moves cars to A to B.
Yeah.
And it allows that transport. But actually, you look at, Derriford Community Park or Central Park or Saltram, which are our big strategic green spaces, they do masses. They enable that nature benefit. They enable the carbon sequestration. They're a place for enterprise. So that's one of the things we've really worked on. Brilliant place for health and well-being. So they're really delivering against a lot of services.
Okay.
And therefore, they need to be seen in the same way that if you're going to build a community, yes, you need the houses. Yes, you need the employment. Yes, you need people to be able to move around. But to deliver all those other benefits, you need to proactively plan in your green.
Okay.
And in our place, blue.
In your place, blue. And just coming back on that aspect, because when you're, let's say, Plymouth City Council, and you have a budget, right? You have a budget to build a road, build a bridge, and so on. And then you look at a park, and a road, you can put that on a balance sheet or something like that. How does the park function? How does it sit in any financial statements? Because something we talked about, for example, with Johan in our last podcast is, how is nature an asset class? So is this something that you guys looked at, and how do you look at the valuation of those services it provides, for example, or what is the return on investment? Is that factoring in your analysis?
Now, back then, no, we were just making it up. We were literally looking at it going, how do we look at this differently? How do we take it from being seen as a liability?
Yeah.
AKA, we have to cut the grass, we have to
Exactly.
manage the trees, what a pain. That's all budget going out the door with nothing coming in. And to be honest, for a while, that kind of was the case. We were like, well, actually, we didn't have the tools at the time. We can't value monetarily that, but we know it does have a service benefit. So we were getting to that stage of very, very early days, identifying the services it was delivering, but not the monetary value you could put against those. Mostly because we were facing those early arguments of, well, there is no money in the health service to pay for that service, even if it's there. And it was like, okay. But we weren't perturbed. We're like, oh, well, we'll work it out as we go along. If we start with a plan, things will come from it. And, one of the things that we did with that plan is it's become an evidence base for all our local plans. So it becomes embedded in our planning policy documents. So one of the ways of funding it in the early days was actually if a big development's coming in, they need more places for people to walk. They need more places for people to play. We need more places for nature. And actually, through the Section 106 developer contributions, we started getting money that way to fund the parks. And we started doing the traditional route of grants. So I think, it has been a journey and we're nowhere near the end. But we started with no, this needs to be done better.
Yeah.
And we need to start there and not worry about how do we get there. And I think that's one of the things that's really important when you're doing new things is just to start. I think there's you don't want to have to get everything perfect. Otherwise, we never would have written that plan because it would have been well, how are we going to fund that? How are we going to make that happen? It was no, we need to make it happen. So let's write it down. Let's get everyone to own it. And then we'll work out the next steps along the way.
Yeah.
And I think had we known then what we know now, we would have been amazed at how far it has come in terms of in relatively short period of time. Not as fast as the urgency we need to, but in a relatively short period of time, we've come from going, oh, we better write a green infrastructure plan. And that will be linked to development into, actually being able to value the benefits, actually starting to look at it as an asset class, finding people that will invest in it. And I think, we've come a long way quite quickly when you look back to where we started. And I think the urgency around it and the interest is just inspiring. Having spent years going, come on, this is really important. Everyone going, whatever. That's green infrastructure. That's weird. To being now a really mainstream thing.
So let's talk about, because I'm curious about why in Plymouth, why of all places did that spark started in Plymouth? How was it received by your peers in Plymouth, but also across perhaps, in the Southwest, across the UK? How was it received and how did you guys manage to push through in spite, I'm guessing, some hesitation?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I say, I think we had some really enlightened planners. Plymouth got, because of what happened during the war and, the place was flattened, we had the Abercrombie plan. There's been quite a tradition of plans in Plymouth, big, visionary, we're going to make this place amazing after that because it needed to be rebuilt and there's Phoenix. So I think we've got that tradition. And I think when we did the more recent plans, that ambition was still there. And it's not just, well, government says housing numbers and we'll put them on the map and we've done our job. It is about making a place. And I think because they were enlightened enough to think about that and then bring people in to then make it something, I think that's really how it got started. And I think with the Green Infrastructure Plan, it was set really well from the beginning. So it was a partnership that wrote it. We engaged loads of people in it and, we had loads of workshops, really traditional stuff about getting everyone around a table and talking and, the things that are old school but work. And so by the end of it, when we'd written the plan, not only did we have all the partners signing it off, we had Logoville on the page where everyone had said, yes, we support it. So I think, we tried to take people with us because we knew we were doing something new. I think obviously, anyone who is looking to make money always looks at this stuff and goes, is that going to cost me more then? And things like that. But I think because we always took it through what I would say is a known process, so through the planning process or developing planning policy documents, everyone had the chance to have their say and inspectors would allow people to talk to it and question it. And I think that allows, even if you don't agree with the outcome in the end, no one could say they never had their chance to have a say on it. And I think that's really important. Not that you just land it from Mars and go, doing that. Because that's really difficult to keep people on board. So I think that really helped. I think the funding side, though, was always difficult because other infrastructure, if you want to have a road, you apply for Department of Transport. There isn't a Department of Green Infrastructure and DEFRA's remit is not aligned totally with what we're trying to do with some of these things. So we're always kind of trying to fit a round peg in a square hole. But that's just made us creative.
Of course. So we focused a lot on green infrastructure. Let's talk about blue infrastructure. How far is blue infrastructure on its journey compared to green infrastructure? And I'd like to give you.
Yeah, I think it is. Well, it's different, isn't it? Because I think, there's a lot of different about marine. So there are marine plans and, you've got management organisation, you've got the IFCAs all looking at that space. I think the difference is people, communities understand the green more because you can walk in it and you can see it and you're like, I get it and I don't want that rubbish there. And, it's much more difficult when you've got something people, unless you're a diver, can see and understand. It's also vast. So I think until recently where we've started looking at the National Marine Park and how we bring people along with us, I think marine is just slightly behind in terms of, to make all this work, we need people with us, and it's harder to win hearts and minds on something you can't see.
But I guess Plymouth is in a good position compared to other cities because of its history, and it's what attracted you also to the city. It's blue, but there's been quite a lot of work from the blue perspective in terms of the planning in Plymouth. So I'm guessing there could be a path which is similar to the journey of bring everyone around the table as you did for the green infrastructure plan that you could perhaps mimic here. Do you think, or do you find that, as you said, because you can't quite see it, that people will have a bit more of a hesitation, or is it because the sphere of influence they have because it's so big?
Yeah,
limits it. I'm just trying to understand in your views.
We've got some really good practice. So for a very long time, we've had Tamar Estuaries Consultative Forum. So that is chaired by the King's Harbour Master, because obviously Plymouth's got a huge naval presence in the city, as well as big commercial presence, and we've got recreational marine use as well. So there's a real mix in like a relatively small place. It's like an amphitheatre. And so that for a long time has been in place to work as a partnership to deliver against all of the statutory requirements for all those organisations. So Plymouth Sound is an amazing place.
Yeah.
From a science perspective, it's got such a tradition. You know, we've got Plymouth Marine Labs, we've got Marine Biological Association, the longest running surveys have happened in Plymouth. You know, from that side, it's been looked at, studied, you know, for a very long time. And TECF, the Tamar Estuaries Consultative Forum, has for a long time gone, actually, we can't do this on our own. We need to do it together. So from a stakeholder perspective, we've got a really good base. So Plymouth Sound has got the most amounts of nature protection acronyms you can possibly imagine. It is a whole soup of SSIs and SACs and SBAs. So that part of it, I think, has worked for a while. What is difficult is to engage, you know, Mrs. Jones from Whitley with, oh, you must love it because it's an SAC and an SPA and a SSSI. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And why do I care about that? So I think the new thing that we've been really working on that, you know, we've done in green for a long time about getting people into spaces and loving spaces is trying to do the same in blue. How do you engage all the communities and not the stakeholders that understand why a Alice shad is important or, you know, why we should look after that habitat, but actually just to love these spaces. And I think that's the big learning we've done from writing plans and getting people involved is people, obviously, from a climate and everything point of view, are one of the biggest problems. They're absolutely the biggest solution. And therefore, unless we can take everyone with us, we've just a load of environmentalists sitting in a room talking about acronyms.
Which we definitely don't want to. But just to throw in another acronym, COVID.
Yes.
So the reason I'm bringing this up, because COVID was an interesting time for all of us, where suddenly there was an opportunity to kind of reconnect with nature. You know, instead of staying locked up in our homes, we had the opportunity to go and take some walks outside. And I'm just curious to see is within Plymouth during the COVID experience, has there been that reconnection with both green and blue? And how has that continued? And what influence has it had in terms of your plans or even the perception of that being infrastructure, if any?
Oh, what a weird time. It's weird now. I think back then, you're like all in our houses. Yeah, it definitely had influence. I think once we were allowed to go for our walks, daily walks, you know, we did some really light touch leaflets just to show people where they could go. And I think we had so many comments about, I never realised this was here. I didn't know I could go there. You know, people had been just from family traditions, getting in their car, driving to Dartmoor, going around somewhere and driving back and not really exploring what was right on their doorstep. And I think we learned a lot at that point around how do we make these places feel more welcoming if people actually ventured in. You know, I'm quite nosy. I would just go, what's over there? I'll go and have a look. But obviously everyone doesn't feel that confident. So we did all these leaflets and routes and we had loads of people out saying, oh, I remember doing this as a kid. Why have I not been here for like 20 years?
Exactly.
And it was amazing how that kind of forced staying close got people out exploring places that they could have gone at any point in time, but just didn't. And I think the other thing that we found was suddenly everyone started swimming in the sea again.
Yeah.
You know, so when I speak to my old boss who recently left, he said when he lived in Plymouth in the 70s, you couldn't get on the foreshore. It was like one of those, you had to put your towel down early in the morning because it was so busy. And we just haven't had that. You know, we keep trying to return the city back towards the sea. That's been the big thing over the last 20 years is like return the city back to face the sea. And what we found with COVID, people who love swimming can go in the swimming pools, they were shut, and
Yeah.
suddenly they were like, no, we could just swim in the
Yeah,
sea.
exactly.
And suddenly we had all these people and this whole like culture and community suddenly reformed around swimming, in the sea. And so that has massively continued since. So one of the simplest but biggest interventions we've made in the Sound is by putting swimming pontoons back out. Literally, you just put them there and people swim to them and swim back. But in the summer, it's amazing. It's like whole seal colonies of people just lying on the pontoon, swimming out. And so I think sometimes we try and make things too complicated, and actually sometimes really simple interventions give people the agency and the feeling welcome enough to do something. And COVID just really pushed that because there wasn't much else to do.
No, exactly. But it's interesting when you said about your previous boss who, it's in 1970s, you said how, it was very hard, to get a space, to go swimming. In your opinion, why has that changed, to a point where we needed COVID to reconnect with the sea?
Yeah, there's a question we've thrown around loads, like what point did everyone go, I don't want to do that anymore?
Yeah.
And what happened and what socially changed. And I suppose, there's probably loads of complex social reasons for that. But I think what's been really interesting in opening these spaces up and trying to make people feel more welcome is there's the generation who going, oh, I remember doing this.
Yes.
I loved it. And, even people within the National Marine Park team were like, I haven't actually been in the sea for 30 years. And suddenly I'm like, I love it again. Why have I not done it? And I think, and then you've got the other end of the scale with like young people coming through now. They're like, this is amazing. Like that we've got this space on our doorstep and I should use it more. So yeah, it's a very interesting, and there's probably like a million PhDs in the reasons why the city turned its self away from the sea. But I think, certainly in the last couple of decades, there's been like, that is our amazing asset.
Exactly.
It's got to come back. That's why it was rebranded Britain's Ocean City. And, it was a perfect place to be the UK's first national marine park, because if you go back generations, the connection between the city and the sea is massive.
Of course.
And we want to make sure the new generation feel as attached to it and love it as anyone did in the past, if not more so.
So I would imagine that as people start valuing it as much as they did in the 1970s, that would support the establishment of the green infrastructure, of your water plans, because there is suddenly this link, this appreciation, this understanding. Now what is needed is just translate that into an asset class, into a monetary value, because that's the ultimate way we seem to value things. Just curious to see your views on that.
Yeah, and I think it depends who you talk about, doesn't it? Because I think, we've had a lot of people that have just gone, nature's just making me feel so much better.
Yeah.
And I've either forgotten or I've never had the experience of actually, selfishly, it's just really good to have nature near me. But that helps with, when you're in a political organisation, it's a democratic organisation, the community wanting something obviously is really, really important. And then I think trying to tie it into the place when you're doing place-based planning, having people understand how important it is starts to get that asset class, doesn't it? It starts to people go, oh, that's not just that thing we do if we've got money left over or a corner of a field left. Actually, it has to be built into everything we do. And we spent, as you can imagine, lots of time mapping all the spaces. And one of the things we have got is a public open space assessment that we did probably about 9 years ago, where we literally surveyed every single green space in the city. It's like 427 or something.
Wow.
So, we know where all the spaces are. And that's, I think, really important when you're starting to talk about an asset class, is that you can't just go, oh, there's a green space there and a green space there. You need to know them, as in you need to know not just how big they are, but what services they provide because of what's on them and what their opportunities are. And it links in with, new things like local nature recovery strategies. You need to know the spaces in an urban environment to know where nature can solve what problem and where it can really have value. And that's what starts turning it from not just a liability to an asset in some people's minds, but to be able to plan for it in an infrastructure asset way.
So talking about what problems nature can solve, I want to maybe take a step back and ask you a question about how is climate change impacting Plymouth? And so if you could tell us a little bit about that, but also as a secondary question is, what role do all those green spaces, all this green infrastructure and water plans have as nature solving problems one of those problems being climate change.
Mm.
I'd like to get your insights on that.
We were one of the councils that declared a climate emergency when that kind of really got pushed. And I think it was, amazing change and a really amazing example of when people power made a difference, because when the climate emergency declaration started across the country, the amount of people that emailed in asking for the councillors to declare a climate emergency in the city was huge. I've never
So
seen
it was
anything
people-powered.
It was people-powered and then led by the politicians. But it was one of the most, amazing kind of people power of going, we really want you to do this. This is so important. So we declared a climate emergency. And I mean, in Plymouth, you would think because of our location next to the sea, our biggest issue would be the sea. But actually, I think like a lot of cities, because they are grey in a lot of places, a lot of impermeable surfaces, actually our surface water, so flooding the roads, flooding houses, is probably even more of a challenge. So, like everywhere, we're seeing more storms, more intense storms. Our drainage systems can't cope because they were built to withstand, what we're probably seeing a number of times a year now, rather than something that they planned for seeing once every 30 years. So, we're seeing that. And I think the variability in the weather, although it's, still early in terms of the tracking of really, really hot. So some years we're like running around watering all our trees we planted because we're in drought. And then the next year we've got so much water we don't know what to do with. And I think in cities, they're not designed for that. They're designed, on the principles of drainage system has this size pipes and it takes the water here and, all those kind of things. And so climate change, I think, from both a mitigation point of view, like how in a city do you bring carbon down, it's been a massive focus for us. So, we're looking to build a solar farm and a heat network and all those kind of things. But from a nature perspective, that's where it really comes into its own on the climate adaptation, because we have climate change the changes that we're going to have to deal with anyway. How much will depend on how good we are at the other parts and across the world in terms of that mitigation. But we are looking at how we use all those spaces to solve some of those problems. So as you've seen, when we went on a walkabout, we have the 70s version of managing the water. Send it down a chute as fast as you can in a concrete channel and get it out to sea as quickly as possible. Problem is when the tide is high, you can't get the water out. And you've got these really channelized corridors that now are just spilling out. And all those places like that, where suddenly we're like, actually, we need to do this differently. We can't keep engineering our way out of this problem by building bigger pipes and bigger tanks. And actually, it all intertwines, doesn't it? Because it's a system. And actually, if we keep building bigger tanks and bigger pipes and pumping that around the city and then pumping it to be treated, you're then adding to the carbon and it all becomes a downward spiral. Whereas one of the things we've really started looking at is this kind of green first approach of how do we deal with that with nature, bearing in mind nature's had millions of years to work out the best way of doing this. And it's kind of how do you harness that in an urban environment? Because it is difficult.
Because when we went from the walk, that you can't fix, the parts of the river that are right in the middle of the city because you've got, million worth of pounds of assets that are right there. You can't just move them.
No, it's like, sorry, you're in the way. Could you just step back so you can give space to the river? But this is where it becomes really interesting and why you need, we found it's been so beneficial working with loads of different people, because you start looking at the problem across the whole system.
Right.
Rather than going, right, this is our bit and we need to solve that problem that's flooding there. And you're like, actually, we need to solve it way up there to stop that happening. And I think that's where the nature-based work has really started to take its shape around, okay, engineers, okay, planners, okay, environmental experts, okay, hydrologists. How do we do this differently? And how do we fit it in? Because although it sounds crazy, but when you look at Plymouth, it's not a small city, but it's not the biggest city. You look at the diversity of things we need to fit in it, houses, roads, and all those things to make it a really great place. You start to have to make some really strategic decisions about what you use your spaces for and be really creative about the mix of things you put in those places. So we've just built a SUDS feature in Central Park, one of our biggest parts.
And SUDS stands for?
Sustainable Urban Drainage Systems. But rather than putting water in a pipe that goes through the park underground and then gets stuck because actually there's not enough capacity to take it out of the park and it floods the park, we've built basically a series of ponds, etc., basically basing the designs on nature and going, okay, how does nature deal with this? Actually, first thing it does, it slows it down. then it holds it, and it lets it infiltrate, and then it releases it. So that's a really good example of our first kind of foray into, okay, let's use nature as our inspiration and the designs, but then fit it into a formal park.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? How do you take everyone with us? And how do you do, how do the hydro brakes work? And it's all new in terms of trying to do that. But I think what we found is that by doing that, we have much more longevity of the solution, because actually you're not based on like, oh, this pipe will work for the next 10 years, and then we need this size pipe and this size pipe. So I think the nature-based side is all about working with nature, who's designed it for millions of years, but then trying to fix that within the urban fabric.
Yeah.
Being cognizant that you can't just knock people's houses down or move a road to make that space. So therefore, you might need to start further up the system, out of the city, to find that benefit.
And how do you make those decisions between those two different, effectively, stakeholders? You got the city, which is grey and impermeable surfaces. You've got the nature, which wants to go wherever it wants, right?
Yeah.
It's
Especially
its own
water.
boss,
Yeah.
especially water, exactly. So, I mean, listening to you, it reminded me what you were saying earlier on in terms of when you're building the green infrastructure plan, how you got everyone around the table, where they each brought in their expertise. You said you need to bring the hydrologists. You bring all kinds of expertise to this table, but there are compromises that needs to be made. How do you make those compromises? And I think it comes back also to the first statement you said, which is nature and growth have to work together. They can't be opposing forces. I mean, Plymouth is a growing city. You have housing requirements, you got transportation requirements, energy requirements. But at the same time, businesses need to make sure they don't get flooded, so they don't have to close down for X amount of days and business interruption costs or asset costs. So how do you manage, from a planning perspective, all those competing forces?
I think knowing the site, so data mapping, as boring as it sounds, knowing what you've got is absolutely key. So, in addition to knowing all about our green spaces, we've got this amazing integrated urban drainage model, so we know how the water works. So that's a really important foundation, because actually when you're asking people to do different things, you can't just wing it. Well, it'll probably work. Hopefully it won't flood the road if we do this. So that's really important, because you're asking lots of people to step out of but we always do it like that.
Yeah.
That's how we do it. That's how we do it. So, that's really important. I think taking a really wide sector of people along that journey and getting them to help you. So, we used to have really funny conversations with the engineers when they were building drainage places, like, we have some curves. Does it need to be square or rectangle? That's not very, like have a wiggle in it or something. Whereas now those same people are coming back with amazing ideas about, we could do this and we could get that swale in there. And so it's because all parts of the system need to move. You can't just be the environmentalist going, I really think this is a great idea. You need those engineers, you need planners, you need everyone to be pushing in the same direction and coming up with the ideas together, because, a lot of things we can look at international best practice, and we can look at what's happening around the country, but it still needs to fit in your place.
Yeah,
and that
it
needs to be local, and it needs to be, creative and based. So I think that's the most helpful thing. We always say the best outcome in the next, decades is my job isn't needed.
Yeah.
Because everyone does that job. It's part of what they do. So if you're an engineer, you're a road transport planner, you all do it. And we're not that needed to go, what about this? Why don't we push this down? Get that funding. So, and it is starting to happen. And I think that's what needs to continue to happen. And we also need to continue to share it, because the worst thing would be is everyone reinventing the wheel in every city. Like, how do you do that? Well, we spent 10 years working on that, and someone else starts creating it and spending 10 years working on that. So that sharing across cities, all learning about how we do this is really important. And then I think, once you start implementing, because it is about people being able to see the difference, when people can see beautiful spaces being created, but also their house not flooding or the road not flooding so they can't get to work, suddenly I think it will click that being nature friendly or helping the climate is actually much better than the old way of doing things. Because change is really hard, isn't it? You ask anyone to change. But I think what you want to do is inspire people by showing. I think you can draw on every map in the world and all the little illustrations and pretend little people standing going, oh, what a lovely pond. But I think, seeing is believing. And I think the more quickly we can start showing locally as well as national examples of how it's not just a nature thing. We're not doing it for the butterflies or anything like that. We're doing it because it makes the city a really great place. And all we need to do is have really high quality nature embedded in the right places in the city.
And again, you're not advocating for just 100% green solutions. Most of the time it'll be hybrid, because if I'm a resident in Plymouth and you're telling me you got two choices, you're facing, I've been flooded already. I can build you a concrete wall, or I'm going to build you a nice little park. And you're trying to sell the park saying, well, it's actually going to do this and this and that. I would probably just look at the wall and say, yeah, I know it's man-made. I can feel it. I can touch it.
I can trust that.
I can trust the engineering, it's behind it. Even, maybe, I think there's also this point about terminology, right? We need nature engineers, in a way. We need to... And I think in the future, an engineer will look at nature as much as he would look at, or actually at concrete or steel.
It'd just be part of the toolbox.
Exactly, part of the toolbox.
That bit works there, and it works together.
But coming back to this point, it's about seeing and believing, right? If I see a concrete wall, I know what it does. If I see a park, I'm like, oh, that's where I go and walk my dog to, How do you, because also nature takes time, right, yes, to come into play. So how do you get people to, in a way, do that leap of faith? Or is it you just show them case studies and you still act for mini leap of faith? I'd like to get your insights on that.
I think we're still working on that one. I think that's it. But I think it's about definitely about having friends with you, because especially in, if you're a local authority, you're a democratic organisation, you have to be quite brave to do something different. Especially you're like, is it going to work? Like, probably. But it's not been tested anywhere else. We've done the calculations, etc. But I think there's something around at the minute. We can't afford not to be brave. And therefore, we need to find lots and lots of ways for lots and lots of different people to come on that journey with us. So one of the things we're working on at the minute, which you'll kind of see the pathway, but it's not direct, is we're trying to make water more visible.
Okay.
So one of the things, when you look at our systems...
So you're not talking about flooding in my house, water visible?
No, promise.
Okay.
But it's all hidden in pipes. And you think, well, there isn't any water here. It's not a problem. It's like, well, actually, you'll see it coming up that drain and, not very long. So there's a really important thing about people being able to understand from their lives how water works around them. What goes down the drains actually is the same thing you're complaining about, because the water quality and the sound isn't what you want it to be. Yeah. So trying to get that to work. And we've done some just street level work. The communities, giving them water butts, they're testing it out. And it's been really great at just getting people to feel also like they've got some agency in that space. It's not like, well, that's all done by the statutory agencies, nothing I can do about it. So that's really helped. And therefore you can then take people on a journey of like, well, actually there's different ways to manage water. And actually the things that you trust are the things that are actually failing.
That are causing it.
Because
also.
The wall is now too short.
Yeah.
And if we keep building that wall up, you're not going to be able to see. And that, like, well, I don't want that. So there's other ways of doing it. But I think it will take time for the nature-based solutions to be seen as the thing that everyone expects rather than the walls. And that is purely just because people have got learned experience, haven't they? There's a problem with flooding, you should build a wall. And it solves it. And you're like, well, actually, if we deliver it upstream and we can see how it comes through the city, it will never flood there and you won't need your wall. But I think we have to be realistic that will take time with people. And in the meantime, there needs to be some strong leadership and a bit of bravery about people going, but it's still the right thing to do. And when we've got enough of these in place, it will start to turn the dial. And I think that's happening already.
Great.
Even in Central Park, it was a bit like, oh, is this going to work? But, it's getting there now.
So seeing is believing. Can you give me an example of a nature-based solution project that you're very proud of? And one that you were surprised by the outcome, let's say.
Surprised by the outcome. I mean, I think definitely Pool Farm with the beavers has been a real success. And I think that, coming back to your previous question of how do you take people with you, it's like, oh, would you like a wall or would you like a beaver? You start having these really interesting conversations. So that project's been... it's been a long-term project. So, Derriford Community Park was all part of a big planning agreement. So we built houses, we're building a road, we're going to build a park. How's that work? Developer contributions, developers gave us the land. We took on a farm. It was falling down.
Okay.
Like, how are we going to make this work? And since then, we had this idea that we'd keep the farm as the operational base and we build a nice new building. Everyone loves the farm. The authenticity of going to a farm has been huge. So we focused there, and we have 2 tributaries that come down, one down here and one down here. This one has got basins from the development, which I would call like traditional suds.
Yeah.
This one's got our beavers on it.
Okay.
So you can literally test, and we have done. So we've had the universities in, had the Wildlife Trust working with us to go, actually, this is really helpful because we've got the same area, so same rainfall, same conditions, both running down, which slows things fastest and which would therefore help with any flooding downstream. And the beavers have just been amazing. But I think not just in terms of what they've done, and you can see their dams and you can see them moving, but getting people to start thinking about different ways of doing it. And because they're like cute and lovely and you can come and see them, they're really engaging. And suddenly you're not talking about a wall or some ethereal, something upstream. You're going, actually, that dam made by those beavers is slowing that water that goes past your house. And suddenly you can start having these pathways that are, people can really see the connections rather than something like, well, an expert's told me that that's a good idea. I don't believe them. I like my wall, thanks. So I think those kind of projects be good, and they are not straightforward at all.
So explain to me, what do you mean by they're not straightforward?
Oh, well, we had an absolute disaster with our first beavers. So we had an area, had them licensed, we had all the grates up, but we had a flood.
Okay.
And it washed everything out, washed all the grates out, literally pushed all the metal out the way. They got out. It was awful. The male went upstream, the female went onto the road.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And it was, and it was like, oh my goodness, they literally, because they hadn't been in there long enough to manage it. And that's how flashy the catchment is. It rains, it fills out. So we were like, and we're luckily, it was European funded, it was an innovation fund. But we were like, do we really want to try this again? Because,
For beavers.
For beavers, is that the right thing to do? Is it the right thing to do in a city? Perhaps beavers and cities just don't work. So we took ages going, should we? And we were like, you know what? Let's give it one more go. Be brave. It is the right thing to do. It was a one-off awful situation where it rained ridiculously. We rebuilt. We had some more people come in, looked at the grates. And then this year, we put the beavers back in. They've made these amazing faces, and they've had a baby.
Oh, wow.
And so we've got a kit down there, and the work they are now doing on the catchment is fascinating in terms of how they're changing it. And I think all these things, it would have been really easy to not make the decision to do it in the first place, because it's like, what are you doing? Beavers in a city? And then everyone's like, this is brilliant. And then went wrong. And they're like, what are you doing? Bringing beavers into a city. So to make the decision to do it again, I think was like, oh, this could really backfire. But, and that is what we need in this space is a lot of innovation funding, because not everything we will do when we're like working with nature is going to work first time in an urban environment. But luckily with this innovation funding, we could do it again, and it's really working now. But it doesn't always work first time or how you expect.
There's so many questions I want to ask you from that. Because
so that's probably one that didn't work and did work in the same way.
Yes, that's exactly that. But I'm already thinking, you've got a team of engineers says, here, we're going to build you some sod. And you've got a family of beavers that says, we're going to resolve the same issues. You've got X amount of funding. Who do you employ? So using the data of the outcomes that both parties have provided, is it a question of I'll go with one or the other? Or what's the right way to approaching this kind of issue if you want that same outcome?
So we have a really good phrase around trees. So right tree, right place, right maintenance.
Yeah.
And that is very place specific. So, you don't want massive oaks right outside people's houses that grow and then they block all their light out. And suddenly the tree that's supposed to be amazing actually becomes a real nuisance. I think it is the same with nature-based solutions.
Okay.
Very much depends on space. So in Derriford Community Park, we've got a load of space. So we could have beavers and, it went past the farm and it links in with our education programme and it links with our mental health improvement programme. And so that beaver benefit on the water quality is amplified by the fact that we have lots of young people there having ecotherapy, and the beavers are part of that. And a lot of people come. We have a lot of children that can't have straightforward education. They need additional needs education, or they can't work in the classroom. They come. The beavers are an additional part of that. In some parts of the city, there's just not the space.
Yeah.
Or you're not going to get the added benefit or something that actually you might go for more straightforward suds. there's some places you still need to use your pipes. And I think, having that really good data and having those really good brains going, okay, that can go there, that could go there. And that's really where we are at this stage, is starting to really use our integrated urban drainage model, all our knowledge about our green spaces, to build up that, like, that bit's a pipe, that bit's a beaver, that then goes into a swale, that then leads into here. And I think what we have to do is keep looking at the system and keep looking at the place. And I think one of the things that will do is it will gradually change probably the whole landscape of the city, but in a way that is really beneficial. And I think keeping pushing the added benefits on all of these is what will sell it to people as well.
Yeah, I call that the nature's got the power of the and. It just keeps giving,
does.
It does that and it does
yeah.
that and it does that, whilst a concrete wall does one thing.
One thing, yeah.
And it brings you a carbon cost to it,
Yeah.
unfortunately. So what I'd like to do now is touch on the subject of funding, because you talked about innovation funding, how that was critical in helping you to be able to do that project again a second time. How have you found funding to implement some of your nature-based solution? Where do you go for that? And
Everywhere.
How hard? Everywhere. Okay. Let's unpack this.
Yeah. So I think one of the things you get good at working in this field is very creative about bringing in money. And I think, not even 6 years ago, 6 years beyond that, maybe, we were very much in the grant funding world.
Yeah.
And the Section 106. So we developer contributions and grant funding was our kind of big area of focus, because not really anywhere else to go. So we got very good at that. So writing peers and things like that. So, that will always be a part, I think, of some of these projects, especially when you want to put the and in, and we want to do this and we want to do that. So I think that's really important. When we started a project a number of years ago now with called Future Parks Accelerator, which was a joint project between a national trust and the National Lottery Heritage Fund. They got together and went, we put all this money into a park and all the other parks in the city are really bad. So how do we change it from, looking at one park to looking at a whole place? And how do we help local authorities and people who manage public land to really expand what they can do in these spaces, particularly as that was the time when money was going and, pressures were going up. So we had a really basic ask. We would really like you to work with us. And they gave some money really to give us headspace to do this work, to look at how we care, value and use green spaces differently. That was literally it. And one of our first, they did this brilliant way of getting cohorts of people together. So cities across the country. So we worked at Nottingham, we worked at Islington and Camden and Edinburgh, Bristol, and all these places came together to go, we've got the same problem. Shall we try and work this out? And Finance Earth came along and went, who would like to do some nature investment work? And did this spiel. And we were like, idea what this guy's talking about. We were like, yeah, well, there we go. And we're like, we have no idea what we're getting into. But that moved us from being in the sphere of grants and Section 106 to starting to look at where you guys, are working with us now on how do we develop these into investment profiles. And honestly, the first 6 months, our minds were just blown. We were just like, I still don't get it. Like, how are we going to make this work? But they were very patient with us and worked it through. And we helped them with no, that's not what that's called in our world. And so because it was two worlds coming together and they were like, blah, blah, blah. And we were like, no, you mean this. And they were like, no, we mean this. So it was brilliant. And so that really got us starting to think about, okay, we need to broaden our portfolio basically of where we can get money for this from. And it was starting at the beginning of the biodiversity net gain discussions. We're like, suddenly there might be, some actual markets and things we can sell, because that had always been the stop, as everyone would go, we know nature's important. We know nature delivers services. Brilliant. Great, will you pay for it then? Well, we don't have a mechanism for that. What would you sell us? And so it was the first time, I think, we'd suddenly started going, actually, we can have units of biodiversity. We could start thinking about units of carbon. And it moved our mindset from grant funding and Section 106 to actually we got a service that we can sell here.
Yeah.
We just need a way of doing that. And how do we do that in a local authority setting? Because it's not really our BAU to do that kind of thing. And that was the start of the journey that moved us from what I'd say was the traditional way of funding things, which always has its limitations because you're responding to the funder, not necessarily your strategic plan. So you always have to be a bit creative, to starting to think about a totally different way of funding nature, which is the journey we're on now.
And so on that journey, so you set up a habitat bank. Can you
Yes.
tell us a little bit about that, the challenges you had around it, and why did you take that path?
Yeah. So, I mean, still I look back, how do we get that through? It's amazing. So as part of the Future Parks Accelerator programme, we went down this route with Finance Earth and support from National Trust and National Lottery Heritage Fund. We all went on this journey, and we decided that actually the first foray into this, it was best to start with something that had some really clear guidelines. So, you have your biodiversity net gain calculators and there's a unit. So that was all set up in a way that we didn't have to justify that and make it credible because it was coming from DEFRA. So that was really good. So we're like, that's a really good place to start. We obviously we knew a lot about our sites already. So we were like, actually, we can do it on our sites. Okay, working through this. And we're like, mechanism. We can't do it as a local authority. So we had to set up a company owned by the council to enable us basically to become the Habitat Bank, because things like we can't have Section 106 with ourselves. So a lot of the mechanisms we're like, oh, damn, another barrier. Like, how do we undo this one? And so, and then we had to take, obviously, there's a big democratic process to do with that. So we had to go to Cabinet about 3 times to say, this is our idea. It's a bit crazy, but, we could do biodiversity and we can do carbon, and we're thinking about water and we're thinking about blue. And, it was really great that the political leadership really got that. And they were like, yeah, why not? Let's have a go,
I'm starting to see a pattern here with Plymouth of crazy ideas of why not? Let's give it a try.
Why not? But, we'd done our work. We had our due diligence. We could say as much as we could. And then we went back later with the details of the Habitat Bank. And actually in those discussions, when we were talking about, well, we'd raise a relatively small investment to start with. We'd start on 3 pilot sites. Let's not run before we could walk. So we were a bit sensible. We didn't try and do everything, but we're like, let's do that. And we had it all mapped out and, all the spreadsheets. And we talked to all our finance people who were brilliant at going, oh, actually, this is really interesting. And how do we do this? And then, the idea came out from council, like, well, why don't we be the first investor? The worst thing that can happen with our investment is we get amazing spaces.
Yes.
So
that's the worst thing.
Yeah, that's the worst thing that can happen. And actually your model looks really solid, and, we know how much growth's happening in Plymouth, so we'll know that we need some nature. But the real selling point, I think, for the councillors specifically was, if we didn't do it in Plymouth, there was a real risk that obviously we'd still have all the housing, we'd still have all the employment, we get the roads, but the nature would leave the city, because the developers would have to buy their biodiversity units somewhere.
Yeah.
And if they weren't in the city, they would be out of the city. So suddenly our place-based models were like, yeah, but we lose that bit of it and we give that money to someone else to deliver something nice over there. That's not good for our communities. Yeah. And we did go around and see if anyone else would be interested. And they were like, oh, city's very difficult. No, we're not, we want to just do big rural areas, which are straightforward. So we're like, well, if no one else is going to do it, we do it. Or we get that outcome. And that's what really swung it. Everyone's like, okay, you've done your work. You know it as much as anyone else does because it was new. We'll go with it. And therefore, that's why we got the Habitat Bank set up. The companies are set up. The investment's in. And we're starting to do the work on the sites this winter.
Amazing.
Yeah, crazy.
So last time we came here, it was a handful of weeks ago, I think. We signed an MOU with yourself. And I'd like to project ourselves to the future. So we're working together. We facilitate bringing private capital. If you had 30, 50, or 100 million pounds that comes into the city to use nature as infrastructure, how do you see Plymouth changing because of that? And how do you see also it being a place that attracts corporates potentially to it because of that change?
Well, firstly, let's make sure it's the 100 million.
Okay.
But I think we've got a huge amount of plans in play. We know what we want to do. We've talked about, from the Plym all the way down. Yeah. So starting, restoration up on the moor. We have this 100 ponds project that captures the water as it goes down, but also has a benefit for farmers because they could draw off those ponds in any kind of drought conditions. And then we deal with the rest of the water that enters the city by rewiggling our rivers where we can, giving them more space. and then looking at other places that we can hold water. So we kind of got all these plans that we want to do. We've got the Plymouth and South Devon Community Forest already.
Yeah.
But we want to supersize that. And I think one of the areas that I'd really want to focus that money is when you look at new, you get the planning right and it'll follow the process. So, you know, you look at the big places, they'll have new parks, they'll have SUDs. It's all embedded because of planning. What I'd really like to do is look at greening the grey, because actually a bit like housing retrofit versus new houses that get all of the insulation, etc., built in, we need to deal with what we've already got. And actually there are some really grey places, and they are really tricky because suddenly you're like, you've got to take up roads and you've got to get the water through the systems and tree planting in the roads. And I think, you know, that's the area we really want to work on as well, so that we're not just doing the easy wins in the green, but actually we're tackling the whole system. And that will definitely take 100 million. But I think what that will do, one, it shows, I think, I don't know, I'm not a corporate, but if I was, I'd want to be investing in places that are looking forwards. You know,
climate resilient also.
Climate, you know, going, actually that place is thinking forward.
Yeah.
You know, they're not just going, oh, we'll invest now and we'll build some stuff. And well, everyone's doing that, aren't they? But actually a city that's really forward thinking and going, actually, you know, we're okay to push the boundaries into these spaces because we've got climate change coming and we need to deal with that. But we need to deal with that in a really hopeful, optimistic and innovative way. And I think there is this kind of, you can get caught in the doom and gloom, can't you? Even I some nights like, oh, I can't listen to anymore.
I can't believe that you've been smiling throughout this podcast. I can't imagine you doom and gloom, but let's play with that.
Maybe for a little bit. But, you know, but actually that doesn't motivate anyone, I don't think. What motivates is like, there is a problem. We're going to go and do something about it. And I think if I was a corporate, that's the kind of place I'd want to invest. And look, it's beautiful and you could come out of your office and go and swim in the beautifully clean sea. And then I can go for a run around the park where I can take my kids to an amazing play area. And I think, you know, all of that, it creates a really great energy, as well as the assets that you've got in that place. And I think that's what we're trying to create in Plymouth across everything. It's just a brilliant place to be. And you should be here, like you are now.
Indeed. So we're rapidly running out of time. Just a few more questions I want to ask you. If any city planner around the UK is listening to us right now, and they're about to embark on that similar journey as you did many years ago, what top tips would you give them?
Definitely get going. Go.
Just get going.
Just get going. Get started. I think the top tips would be definitely learn from everyone else that's already doing it. I think this is one of the key things as local authorities we need to get better at is, you know, none of us have got like loads of spare cash. We're all really pressurised.
Yeah.
I mean, who would create a business that has children's services, adult services, collects the waste, manages the parks, tries to, you know, they're really difficult places to work. Therefore, you don't want to reinvent the wheel.
Yes.
Go and nick ideas off everyone. And, you know, through the Future Parks Accelerator and what will now been launched around the nature towns and cities, we're starting to get that cohort building. And we do the same. We'll go up to Islington and say, how did you get that through in your park? And they'll give us the ideas. And I think that's key. We don't have time or the money or the energy to every single place to start from scratch and build it up. We don't need to now. So talk to people, go on the networks, find the toolkits. And then I think the other thing to do is make sure that you keep your political leaders and your senior leaders with you the entire way. Because once they get confident in what's happening, they feel confident to take those brave decisions, which ours did, and have your friends around you. So, you know, we have you guys, we've got really great relationships with the National Trust, Natural England and DEFRA and the EA. And it makes such a difference when you're on the precipice of like, oh, do we want to do that? If everyone's with you, go, yeah, we're here, we'll go with you.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, makes that journey easier because you're not on your own.
Exactly. So talking about, you know, going on that journey and learning from others, is there any podcasts that you follow that you'd be happy to share for our listeners to listen to?
We've definitely got a load of links. So when we set up our Habitat Bank, when we launched it, we got inundated with people going, can you tell us about it? We're like, yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, we can't now. There's too many of you. So we ran a whole, we did a load of webinars and we recorded them and there's a whole resource there. So literally you can just follow the steps of what we did. So we can share all those.
Perfect. We'll put on a link on the blog post.
Yeah. And all, you know, we've got a lot of links like that because, again, we want people to share. We don't want people to start from scratch. We always said we'd love Plymouth to be the pioneer about all these things, but we failed if we stop there.
Yeah.
That ripple effect has got to go wide.
Okay. And my final question to you is, is there two individuals you would love to listen to a review on our podcast that you'd recommend that we interview?
Well, one I always answer, David Attenborough. Because I just love
That's exactly what
listening.
Rob said.
So I'm the same. We're just like, you get him on there, I'm happy. The other person, and sorry, Carolyn, I haven't asked you, but Carolyn Cadman works in Southwest Water. And I think what is really inspiring about Carolyn is it's really not easy. No work is easy. But it's really easy to work in an organisation where everyone gets it and you're all moving in the right direction. What I love about Carolyn is she's going into a sector that's not got the best record or the best comms at the minute and is looking to make a real change. And I think that is really inspiring. And we've been working with Carolyn and her team a lot around the Green First program. It's really brave, taking people with her. And I think it's that kind of thing that's really inspiring to listen to, because it's kind of easy if either you've got loads of money or everyone's agreeing with you. Your job's easy. To go in and actually do something hard is really inspiring.
Agreed. So Caroline, expect a phone call very soon. David Attenborough, I'm sorry, I don't have your number, but I will try. But if you're listening, feel free to reach out. For all listeners who are listening to us via the podcast, go check out the YouTube channel, because you can see how Kat expresses herself with her arm and her gigantic smile. Kat, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.